And I think when you've gone through kind of something that we have, which is, we could have died, like that really changes your outlook on life.
Welcome to the Strokecast. A Generation X stroke survivor explores rehab, recovery, the frontiers of neuroscience, and how to peel a banana with one hand.
Hello, I'm Bill Monroe, and welcome to episode 114 of the Strokecast. Kristen Aguirre is an Emmy-winning journalist, a former TV news anchor, and a young stroke survivor. I've followed Kristen for a while after I first heard that she was returning to TV last year after her stroke, and I was thrilled to finally have her on the show. Not because she was a media personality, but just because she has a great approach to post-stroke life, empowerment, and really the things she's doing with her days now. You see, Kristen is no longer with that station in Denver for reasons we won't get into here, but you can certainly search her name online to see some of the reports around her departure. What she is doing, though, is continuing to work on her recovery back in Chicago, and she works with other stroke survivors through Heal the Brain with Jane's Likeminded program, and of course through her own Instagram connections, which is, well, as I said, that's where we connected, and that's where Kristen connects with a whole bunch of other folks. So what's it like to go from high-driving newscaster to yoga-loving stroke survivor? Well, let's meet Kristen and find out. So, Kristen, thanks so much for joining me on the show this week. I'm glad we're able to connect.
Yeah, I'm so excited to be here.
You've had a fascinating story. So I guess let's start off with, what was your day-to-day life like before you had your stroke?
So before my stroke, I was a broadcast journalist, and I've been in the business for about 10 years. My day was always pretty tightly scheduled. That world is pretty highly regimented. I basically worked out, went to work, and I wasn't entirely happy just because I felt like a robot a lot of the days. And so that's typically what my life was like, if that answers your question.
You're busy keeping in shape. You're busy spending time at work on a very tight schedule. It sounds like that was really sort of the focus of your life then, was about working in the media.
Yes, my career was definitely my number one priority in life.
So I've been talking with more and more journalists in print and in broadcast, and it is just a fascinating and an intense world.
It's definitely intense, yeah. It's just nonstop. It's like you're working 24/7.
Is that the life you had always wanted? Had you grown up wanting to be a journalist?
I eventually wanted that life, but growing up, I wasn't practicing being a reporter in front of television, but I did always love telling stories, helping people, and talking. And when I went to undergrad, one of my advisors had suggested taking maybe a couple journalism courses, and then I ended up falling in love with it. I wrote for the student paper, and then just kind of kept building off of that when I was like, okay, this is what I could do. And it wasn't until grad school that I thought, let's get into TV. Honestly, it's just because I didn't really see a lot of Latinas in English-speaking news. So I guess that's why I never really thought maybe this is something for me. And then when I landed an internship at the Fox Chicago station here in Chicago, and I walked in there and I was like, oh, I could do this. And then I ended up having a really great mentor who was like, okay, well, why don't you go back to grad school and learn how to use a camera and write for broadcast? And I did, and I loved it, and then just kept building off there.
Did your ethnic background, do you think that helped or hindered your career?
Probably a little bit of both. Honestly, I think depending on, a lot of stations want to look, like they're diverse. And so depending on how many, the truth is it's just depending on how many, Latinos they have at their station. If they're looking for another one, then great, that could help me. But if they have enough, if they feel they have enough, then they're definitely not going to hire me.
Some of them probably felt if they hire too many, then that changes the genre of the station.
Which is ridiculous because nobody bats an eye when the entire news station is all white. But that's just kind of where we live in.
It's always kind of just interesting to just sort of swap the racial or ethnic backgrounds in those scenarios and just see how ridiculous it becomes.
Oh yeah, because if you have a newsroom full of Latinos, then it's Telemundo. When I think the best newsrooms I've worked in have been the most diverse because they just bring so many different insights into the conversation, and I think that's the best coverage. But not everybody thinks like that, and that's fine.
One of the things that's been I found interesting from my own stroke experience has been, I mean, as a cis-het white guy, I thought I kind of had an understanding, at least an intellectual level, of what people talk about when they talk about privilege or those types of things. But once I joined the world of people with disabilities and started seeing things like, just the natural ableist privilege a lot of people have, it's like, oh, that's what you mean.
Right, that's privilege. It doesn't mean you grew up rich.
Exactly.
Like so many people think that's what.
Yeah, it's about things that you just never had to think about before.
Right.
You ultimately moved to Denver. What brought you to there?
My job. So basically, when you start in news, you typically start at a lower market because that's kind of where you really cut your teeth. So that's kind of where you learn everything in a smaller market. It's also great because if you make mistakes, typically you won't end up on YouTube when you're in a really small town. So I started off in Quincy, Illinois, which is a really small town here in Illinois. And then I got a promotion within the same company I was working for and went to Flint and anchored there for 3 years. And it was actually there when the water crisis happened. And it was fascinating to be there. And that's really where I found kind of my love for journalism more because I was really able to focus in on how the Spanish-speaking population was impacted by the water crisis because a lot of the pamphlets and information was coming out in English. And so they were kind of left behind a little bit. And so I worked heavily with the undocumented population there. And I was actually able to get an Emmy nomination for the story that I did. And I was so proud of it and thankful that, they trusted me with their story. Mm-hmm. And so after there, I was able to get a job offer at KUSA in Denver, which is where I was for the last 3 years before I moved back home to Chicago.
So you're working as a journalist in Denver then, and then you have your stroke. So what happened that day of your stroke?
During the week, 3 days a week, I was a reporter, and then on the weeknights, I was an anchor. And it was a typical Saturday. I went to my spinning class. I went to a fundraiser that I was part of an organization. And then I came home, and I loved napping before my stroke. So I was like, I can get a quick nap in before I go to work. And then I just had this I could feel a migraine coming on. But this was different. Like when people always ask about what does a migraine feel like? It was a pain that I've never felt before. It was over my left eye, I believe. And it was just so bad. And I thought, okay, I've had migraines before and typically a nap in the dark gets rid of them. And so I was like, okay, I thought I was going to call in, but luckily I didn't or no one would have found me. And so then I just decided to lay down. And I thought it was an hour because I set an alarm. And then the next thing I knew, my boyfriend was banging on my door to tell me to open it to let him in because I missed my newscast. So I thought I took a nap at 1 and my newscast was at 5. So clearly I overslept and I was really, really close with my coworkers and they knew that wasn't really my style to just not show up somewhere. So they thought something was wrong and that's why they called my boyfriend to have him to come check on me. And when I popped up to go answer the door, we think my stroke already hit because when I went to stand up, I collapsed because my left side was already paralyzed and I hit my head off my dresser and I woke up a little bit later. I must have passed out because I woke up again later to my boyfriend still banging on my door. And at that point, he knew something was wrong because I would never let him. I was already yelling at him to shut up because he was embarrassing me. And so he called the ambulance and then they came and then assessed me and took me to the ER and then everything from there.
So what kind of stroke had you had?
I had an
It sounds like it
ischemic
was
stroke.
a hemorrhagic. Oh, you had an ischemic. Interesting.
Yeah.
And was that on the left side? That was then on the right side, I'm guessing.
No, my entire left side was actually impacted.
Your entire left side was impacted. So you had the ischemic stroke on the left side, and that paralyzed then your right side?
No, my entire left side was paralyzed.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. Okay. Interesting. So that's one of those things I don't hear about. Normally when I talk with survivors, and this is part of just the rich tapestry that the stroke community is that whenever I hear somebody talk about the, sort of that worst headache of their life, that's typically a hemorrhagic stroke.
Sure.
But that's one of those important things to keep in mind is that we hear these stories and we talk about the be fast signs, but always have to remember strokes can manifest in so many different ways. The brain is just that complex.
Right. We're all so different. And one of the things that I did realize, like, once I became really into the stroke community is that, I did feel like I had to throw up but I ended up not doing it. But so many other women that I've spoken to have said during their episode or their stroke that they felt they had to throw up too. And I just think that's so nuts. Like, there's so many differences, but there are also a lot of similarities with a lot of us.
So then how long were you in the hospital and inpatient?
So I was in the ER and the ICU for about a week. And then, because I was a news anchor there, it had gotten out that I had gotten sick, and somebody must have called Craig Hospital and told them a little bit about me, because then during the hospital we had a representative of Craig come, which is one of the best rehabilitation hospitals in the nation. So they came and they talked to my parents and I, and had suggested, like, hey, you can move for Kristen there. It's great for brain injury. And then, so I went to the hospital on the 13th, and then the 18th we went to Craig, and I was there for 3 months in the rehab hospital.
And what was that experience like at the rehab facility?
So weird, but it was amazing, actually. Like, I just have such a place in my heart for that hospital. They saved my life, 100%. There were days where I seriously thought, like, I would never be happy again, and I just had the best therapist, and everyone's so supportive. They were so supportive. They gave like some of their patients, apartments where they can stay. So my parents were able to stay on campus with me while I was in rehab, which was so nice to, like, be able to have, like, a family member with you at all times. And yeah, they were just so supportive, helped with everything, like getting back into work. They had a therapist for that. Obviously learning to rewalk, just so supportive. And I mean, was it scary? Yeah, of course. Nobody wants to be in a rehab hospital. But really, for me, that was the best place I could have possibly ended up, because they just really gave me another idea on what life could look like. Even if I was still in a wheelchair, like, I knew I would still be happy because of what they were teaching.
One of those things that I found, I think, especially for some of the more high driving sort of type A folks who are out there, once you find yourself in a rehab hospital for an extended time, in some respects, it can almost be relaxing, because suddenly, or at least in my experience, I had one job to do, one thing to focus on, and
right.
As opposed to the 30 things I usually do. So what's your favorite memory of being in that hospital? It sounds like a fantastic place for you to have been.
Sure. The people were honestly the best. Like, my heart still fills when I think about my therapist and my team there. They were best. But probably the best memory was when I was in a physical therapy with my therapist. My parents were there, and we saw my left toe wiggle, and it was seriously the smallest movement ever, but my therapist was so excited, and she was just like, this is how it starts. And she was right. Like, just to be around people who literally are celebrating even the most minute thing, like, that really impacts your spirit when you're going through something like recovering from a stroke. And so my family was just so excited and supportive, and, everyone was cheering in the gym. And that was definitely my favorite. And also my mother was living with me, which, I mean, living with your parents in your 30s, ridiculous to begin with. And then, it's like my mother and I are arguing and the nurses are like, what's going on in here? And then we're fighting and then they would just be like, oh, okay, no big deal. We'll come back later.
I'm hoping after all of this COVID stuff gets under control that, folks who are experiencing inpatient experiences can once again start to have more of those guests and more people visiting them in person.
I know. I think my recovery would be very different if I had it right now during COVID, because I had such a strong support system that I always had a visitor, my parents with me. Like, that I think really impacts us when we're recovering. To have somebody who loves you with you at all times cheering you on. And I do feel for those who are recovering right now.
So once you got out of the hospital, what was your day-to-day life like then?
Really, my day-to-day life it's constantly changing depending on how strong I am. And I was still really focused on my recovery. So it's like, wake up when I can and then really like try to get workout in or whatever regimen I had planned with my therapist, go to therapy. And as I've gotten stronger, it's kind of stayed the same, but ultimately has changed. I can do a lot of workouts now, so I do that. But yeah, when I got out of the hospital, I was still really focused on strengthening my muscles that were extremely weak and things like that.
How are your deficits manifesting today?
I'm able to walk and run again, which is amazing. And I can really use my arms now. I am still working on my fine motor skills on my left hand, which really, depending on the day, can really irritate me or just kind of like, this is what it is. I think I am extremely grateful for where my recovery is, because I've met so many people that, maybe don't have the same story as I do, where the recovery maybe wasn't as strong as mine was. And so if I never get my motor skills back again, I mean, will that be, the worst thing that's happened to me? No, but I still work at it every day. I don't think there'll be a day I stop working at it.
That's one of those things that's really valuable that comes out of the experience. When I think if somebody had told me the day before my stroke that tomorrow you will no longer be able to use your left hand, that would have been a horrifying idea.
Right.
But as I live with these challenges, realize, you know what? It's not the end of the world. There are absolutely worse things that can happen.
Right. You're still living a fulfilled life.
Exactly. The other thing I found that's interesting about that is that prior to stroke, I mean, I know I never really thought about my arms as anything other than that which attaches my hand to my body. But you start getting some of that movement back, and even if I'm not able to use my hand, I find I'm able to use that left arm in new ways to hold things, push buttons, etc. As you've progressed through your recovery and your routine, I mean, what does today's routine look like? I mean, I know you're still working out, but what are you doing these days?
Well, so I wake up, I take my dog for a walk when she wants to, and then I do a workout. I also practice gratitude every morning. So I journal, I have a prayer journal, which I think has really, really impacted my recovery, because I've just been so grateful every day. Even just to wake up, I think if you start your day, have an attitude of gratitude, it really impacts the rest of your day. And so I do that. And then I've left the news business. So now I am looking for another job in communications. And I think I want to go into nonprofit, because I think that could fuel my passion for helping others still. And I think when you've gone through kind of something that we have, which is, we could have died, like that really changes your outlook on life. And I just no longer wanted to continue in an industry where I felt like was no longer my passion. And so now I'm just kind of really searching for something that fuels my heart and my spirit. So I basically look for jobs all day and connect with like former colleagues or people in different industries now. And I'm also gearing up to launch my own podcast called Beauty in Her Brain, which focuses on females in post-brain injury and also like just during transition. Because, I mean, we all go through a lot of the same things, but I think as a woman, you know, I went through things differently than you did. And of course, you went through different things than I did because you're a man. And I think a lot of women and probably men lose a lot of self-confidence when they have their stroke. I mean, I couldn't even put my own hair up in a ponytail. You know, when I looked at myself in the mirror after my stroke and I just felt like I didn't even recognize that woman. And to me, that was the hardest part, getting back. And if I can help other women kind of maneuver that path and make it a little bit easier, then that's what I want to do.
It's fascinating how these experiences then just transform the things that we want to talk about. You know, the aspects of our journey that we're able to then go ahead and embrace. And the Stroke Survivor podcast community has just been, you know, absolutely fantastic. I've been able to connect with some amazing people. And so it's a great club to be a part of.
I mean, who would have thought that this community even existed? I mean, I didn't really even know about it until I was, you know, engrossed in it. And it's really such a beautiful community. Like, if you're looking for a bunch of strangers who are just cheering you on every day, like, this is it. It's amazing.
Yeah, what I like to say is that the Stroke Club is filled with amazing people, but the dues really suck.
Yeah, I love that. I actually listened to one of your podcasts when I got out of the hospital. I forget which one it was, but you were interviewing a man and he had talked about how, you know, for him, it was really hard for him to leave the house because he was embarrassed by like his speech that was impacted. And you were very much like, no, don't ever feel like that. And I just was like, I love this man who was basically like, you know, telling people like, you shouldn't be embarrassed by what happened to you because it's taken about a year and a half, but I feel almost lucky that I had a stroke because the way I look at my life now is so different and the way I view people and what I want out of life is just totally different than what pre-stroke Kristen wanted or what she even valued.
You know, and that's a common thing I hear from survivors. We talk about how lucky we feel because either from the new perspective we have or because things could have gone so much worse than they did.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned earlier was your pre-stroke affinity for naps. I imagine post-stroke, you have an even stronger affinity. What's been your experience with the neurofatigue we often encounter?
Neurofatigue is the pit. I think like pre-stroke, you know, it's like people are like, I'm exhausted. And it's like, you have no idea. I always see that meme in the stroke community. It's like, you don't know what exhaustion is until you need a break after you've taken a shower. And it's so true. It's like there are times where I get up and I go for a walk and I do a very simple workout that frankly wouldn't even have made pre-stroke Kristen sweat. And now I'm like, I'm going to need a nap. And I really like made sure that naps are like part of my day if I need it. And which I typically do. Because of neurofatigue. I mean, you can be exhausted after sitting down reading a book. And I think I used to be a little bit more embarrassed by it, but now I've really taken ownership of it where I'm like, nope, can't make that. I need to have a nap. And I think that helps build confidence in me that like I really have some strict boundaries about what Kristen needs. Like this is a new person. She's in a new body and I need new things like daily naps. And if it's after if it's after a small mile walk with my dog, then that's where it is. There's really little embarrassment for me about naps at this point. I mean, my friends who I'm close with always joke around. It's like, of course you were going to go maybe while you were doing your favorite thing, which is napping.
Absolutely. I think that's one of the things I've described as one of the stroke perks is the socially acceptable naps.
Yeah, I'm like, can't do it. I got a nap, 100%.
So one of the other things that's played a role in your recovery has been yoga. Can you talk a little bit about how yoga is fitting into your life?
Sure. So I've always kind of did yoga, but not to the love of the extreme that I have for it now. But I really started it because my occupational therapist, we kind of started it for some more weight bearing. And because my legs were getting stronger faster than my arms, we were seeing like what I could hold up. And, we could do cat-cow pose or do whatever to kind of strengthen out or stretch out my left side more. And so the more I could do, I just kept adding on new positions, and it's really helped strengthen, yes, my body, but also my spirit so much. I mean, there are so many things that go through your mind when you're, in recovery from stroke or anything like this, or when you're in transition, like, am I going to get better? Is my life going to go back to normal? Like, there's just constant things happening up here. And yoga has really allowed me to kind of center myself and kind of quiet the noise while I figure out how I want my day to go. It's really helped center me, which I think is really important. And so, yeah, I try to, any young stroke survivor I talk to, they always ask, what's their first step? And I think for us, because our brain is already working on overdrive, trying to, our neuroplasticity, get things connected again, and they're making up for our parts that are injured. But I think the best thing we can do for it is really kind of give it a second to center and relax and get squared away for your day. And that's kind of why I just love yoga so much.
So is it actually then just sort of quieting a lot of the other random thoughts that happen in your brain, or marshaling your resources?
I think a little bit of both. Like, kind of, my anxiety was really heavy after my stroke, and I still battle it a little bit. So whenever I feel like that, like maybe a panic attack coming on, I can use kind of those tools that I've learned from yoga about kind of relaxing my muscles and focusing on one thing, and that'll kind of help me get a handle on the anxious feelings before they kind of get out of control and I can't take care of them anymore. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does make sense, because those anxious feelings, that anxiety, that then just, again, burns more of those precious brain resources that that you have. Was the anxiety and the panic attack something you contended with pre-stroke, or is that just another lovely gift of the stroke experience?
No, that was a lovely gift from stroke. I mean, I was a little bit anxious, like most people have, but not to the point where I was like, it was impacting my day. Where now anxiety definitely can impact my day if I let it.
Does doing the yoga then provide a way of addressing that in the moment, or is it more about just preparing your mind to be in a better base position to process those feelings when they happen? And that is a terribly worded question, but
no, I get it. It's a little bit of both. So like, if I can start my day on the right foot, that kind of, I think, gives me a clean slate for the day, and I'm ready to like be positive and, put my best foot forward, but also in the middle. So one of my first panic attacks after stroke was going to my neurologist's office. It was super packed, and I was really paranoid about my appointment with him, and I could feel my panic attack coming on. And so what I did is I just sat in a corner and I kind of used yoga tactics. Like, there's a lot of breath work in yoga. So focusing on one thing and using my breath work and kind of stretching out my legs a little bit and like lifting my arms really helps. So I think in the moment, if you use kind of like tools like the breath work or the stretching, like whatever really fuels you, that can help like some of the panic attacks. I also was like, feverishly texting my parents like, oh my God, I'm having a panic attack. And they were like, okay, Lola, what have you learned? Like, let's focus on breath, focus on one thing, and then let everything else kind of fade away.
You've talked in other places about the importance of routine. Can you tell us a little bit about how routine helps you?
So early on in my recovery, my therapist had said something along the lines that like, your brain loves routine. And so, it's like one of those things that I just kind of have always remembered, which if you have a stroke, memories can be a little bit difficult for us. And so I kind of latched onto that. And I thought my routine pre-stroke was a little bit sporadic because it kind of depended on what time I went into work, if I could do this morning routine and what was happening that day. And now that I have that time, I was like, okay, how can we make the best routine for Kristen to have the best day? And so, making sure that I get like tea in, a prayer, a meditation, yoga, any movement to me, that like sets my day up well. And I think routine has helped that so much. And I think it can kind of like train your brain a little bit, you know, like into thinking into a certain way. And I think the more you do something like a routine, like I know the more I continue to work out, the stronger I'm going to get. The more I meditate, the more at ease I'm going to be inside. And with routine and constantly doing that comes growth. And I think routine is crucial for us in recovery because of that.
And that brings us to our hack of the week.
One of the first things that we did when I moved back home after the hospital was make sure like all of my shampoo bottles, my dishwasher stuff, whatever I use, they all had like a pump. And to me, especially if you're hemiplegic maybe on one hand and you have one side, whatever, I think the pump is just easier instead of having to physically lift something and dump the soap out. You know, having a pump can make things a little bit easier. You know, you can use your elbow, whatever. So that's what I did. Like made sure my shampoo bottles even now I still do it just because it's a habit. I think the pumps are just easier to use if you're having a little bit of some disability issues.
Kristen, this has been great. If folks want to know more about you and what you're up to, where should they go?
Sure. Follow me on Instagram. I'm pretty much an open book there. You can message me. That's how I connect with a lot of, other stroke survivors. My hashtag or my handle is @Kristen Aguirre. And, I also have my podcast. I have a page that I am working on before I get my launch with the podcast, which is Beauty and Her Brain. And I also have a website, KristenAguirre.org. You can catch me at. Really anywhere. I also do some workshops with Heal the Brain with Jane. I'm sure I know you know her.
Oh,
but
yeah.
For other people who don't know her, I do a woman empowerment workshop that's coming up next week, actually. You can check out her page when I hold those workshops, and they're so fun. It's a great way to like meet other people in our community.
Absolutely. And folks who may remember Jane from Heal the Brain with Jane, she was on the show a few weeks ago. Other instructors in the Heal the Brain with Jane program include Joe Borges from Neuro Nerds, who's been a guest here, as well as I believe Ella Sophia is a part of that community as well. And she's also.
Don't you just love our community? Like, I just love us so much. It's definitely not a community you want. I'm doing the air quotes with my right hand. You want to be a part of. But once you're in here, you're like, oh my God, I love all these people so much.
Exactly. They just continue to delight and amaze me. And it's such a thing to realize that you're not alone and that these people get it. And in a way, never could have imagined sitting in the ER that day.
Mm-hmm. It's really beautiful.
So great. So we will have all of those links over at strokecast.com. And Kristen, I'm so glad we were able to connect. And
I know, I'm so glad I was able to finally talk to you. I swear, when I listened to your podcast, I felt like so like overjoyed to like have somebody I could connect with before I had connected with other people. I was listening to your podcast, and I just remember you telling that guy, like, do not apologize for your deficits. And I was like, yes, this man knows what he's talking about.
Awesome. Well, that just warms my heart to hear. I mean, that just makes doing this all worthwhile.
Oh, 100%.
I really like Kristen's approach to gratitude. We're all still here. And yeah, sometimes things suck, and I certainly won't pretend everything is awesome. But we're here, and we can do things. One of my favorite t-shirts to wear is from the show Hamilton, of course, and it says simply, just like my country, I'm young, scrappy, and hungry, and I'm not throwing away my shot. We're all here. We all have an opportunity to do things. We all have a shot to take, and let's not throw that away. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to leverage my shot to do what I hope will be some amazing things in the future, and hopefully even today. I also connect with Kristen's feelings about her experience at Craig Hospital in Denver and how she feels about her therapists. I mean, longtime listeners have certainly heard me rave about Emily and Olivia and Megan and Barb and Stephanie and physiatrist Dr. Kim Middleton. Both Emily and Dr. Kim have been on the show previously even. These folks have been a critical part of my post-stroke life, and I am grateful for that. Kristen mentioned the work she's been doing with Jane Connolly's Likeminded program. You may remember Jane was on the show just a few months ago. And actually, several of the instructors in that program have appeared on Strokecast, including also Joe Borges, Vince Holland, Ella Sophia, and of course, as I said, Jane herself. You can listen to all of those interviews over at strokecast.com/likeminded. For links to Kristen's Instagram, the Likeminded training program, and more, be sure to check out the show notes for episode 114 over at strokecast.com/gratefulkristen. If you'd like to hear from other instructors in Jane's program, be sure to visit strokecast.com/likeminded. And I'd like you to take a moment and think about what you're grateful for this week. Go ahead and let us know on Instagram or Twitter, and be sure to tag Kristen and me so we can see that as well. Please subscribe to Strokecast in your favorite podcast app so you never miss an episode. And of course, as always, don't get best. Get better. Thanks a lot. I'm Bill Monroe, and I'll talk to you soon.
The Strokecast, Bill Monroe, and Bill's guests provide general information and entertainment, not medical advice. Please do not make any changes to your treatment plan or the execution of your treatment plan without first consulting your personal doctor or medical team. The Strokecast is a proud production of the Currently Speaking Podcast Network.